Good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Del Vecchio, specializing in life transitions, downsizing, and the senior living industry. Coming up on the show, almost 1 in 4 Canadians are caregivers. Much of it is unpaid, and the vast majority of caregivers have not even been formally trained. Why is that? Well, because many have been thrown into the role of caregiver. Many of you listening today may in fact be caregivers, and if not, you most likely know someone who is. We're going to be addressing the many challenges faced by caregivers and what could be done to make their lives just a little bit easier. And on the second half of the show, did you know the month of May is Speech and Hearing Month? We're going to hear from the wonderful folks at the Montreal Oral School for the Deaf, and we're also going to hear from a young man and his mom about his cochlear implant and how it changed his life. I hope you're enjoying this gorgeous weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Now, according to the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, caregivers in Canada provide support equivalent to 2.8 million full-time paid care providers each year. And that's a contribution of worth more than $97 billion in health care resources that our caregivers are providing right across the country. And as our population ages, caregivers will play an even more important role in society. Well, let's bring in Liv Mendelsohn to tell us a little more. Liz is the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. Liv, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Great to be with you today.
Well, Liv, thank you for taking some time on a busy Sunday for you. I understand you just landed in Dallas, of all places, and I want to thank you for bringing some awareness to this very important topic. And maybe for some background, what is the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence?
Yeah, we are relatively new, so folks may not have heard of us yet, but we are an arm of the Azrieli Foundation. And really focused on tackling the crisis in care in Canada. And I think a lot of people became more aware that there's a caregiving crisis during the pandemic, and we saw really the strain put on caregivers and people who need care. It has sort of pre-existed the pandemic, really was revealed during the pandemic, and is only continuing. So we don't have enough support for caregivers, family, friends, chosen family who provide care, or for the workforce, the caregiving workforce, our care providers, who are personal support workers, disability support workers, who keep our families going.
Well, it's wonderful. And like you say, relatively new. Hats off to the Azrieli Foundation that are backing you. They are very serious and huge philanthropists right across the country. And glad you're heading this up. And Liv, you're doing some wonderful work. And I'd like to hear, you have your own caregiving story because this is a personal one for you. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. Like a lot of Canadians, I didn't think of myself as a caregiver. I thought of myself as a daughter, a granddaughter, a mom. But I was born into a caregiving role when I was young. My grandmother lived with us, and as she developed dementia and Alzheimer's, we took care of her and provided her with love and support. And as her needs grew, physical supports in acts of daily living and feeding and all of the things that she needed. And I continue to be a caregiver. I have a son with a disability, and I'm caring for my dad now. And I think most Canadian families understand what that's about.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny you mention this because I think even some people don't even regard themselves as a caregiver, right, Liv? When in fact they truly are.
In some ways, that has added to the crisis in care because caregivers are the glue that keeps the healthcare system going. They're unseen often and not factored in into the care team. But we're out there day in and day out, and we don't even recognize our own role. So it has been hard, I think, for people to ask for what they need in terms of policy, because it's not a label that everyone identifies with. But I think more and more there's a recognition that this is a whole sector of work, and much of it unpaid work, that is really keeping our healthcare system going and keeping our families going. And people need support because you can't provide care indefinitely without impacts to your health, to your mental health, and which in turn affects the person who's receiving care.
Absolutely. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio here, and we're talking with Liv Mendelsohn. Liv is the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. So, Liv, let's get into some of the biggest challenges you're seeing out there faced by caregivers.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned up at the start, I mean, caregivers don't get training to do the kinds of care and support that we're expected to do and want to do for our loved ones at home. You know, how to safely lift someone or how to best feed someone. Those are skills that no one teaches you, and caregivers often get injured and really don't have the information that they need. And then there's the impact on people's pocketbooks. People have to step back often from their employment roles. We know that 15% of caregivers have to reduce their work hours. We know that 26% of caregivers take a leave of absence from their job to provide care. And that's largely, not only, but largely women who are taking time off during their peak earning years. So that affects their career advancement, that affects pensions. And then there's the mental health toll. We know from a recent survey that almost 80% of caregivers experience loneliness, isolation, exhaustion, and anxiety. So there are real impacts to care, and caregivers need support.
Yeah, you bring up so many good points, Liv, and you talk about the mental health, and it is, and sometimes people, and it's certainly in my line of work where I'm dealing with a lot of adult children, taking care of mom or dad, and really struggling with the aspect of it, and it tends to grow through time as care increases, and everyone's trying to hang in there, and I've got this, and sometimes they don't realize there could be some great resources out there just to help them out a little bit. And I want to get into that. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence was created to respond to many of these challenges, and so I'd love if you could provide us with a couple of examples of how the centre can help out caregivers right across the country.
Absolutely. We're trying to work on multiple levels. So we are trying to support caregivers now with basics like mental health support. We're partnered with the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health to offer lots of online resources and supports. You can find on our website courses that people can take. We also partner with provincial organizations like L'Appui in Quebec to offer support there, and L'Appui has a phone line you can call to get specific local resources in both official languages. We are very busy supporting underserved communities who have even bigger barriers, and we're also working towards a shift in public policy because we know, as much as we want to support caregivers now with their mental health and their immediate needs, we know that this system can't continue this way and that people are past their breaking point. So we really need government intervention to better support caregivers.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned L'Appui. You're doing a wonderful job nationally, and yet for all of us, we need these local resources, and L'Appui is just one of those fantastic organizations based in Quebec. And simply look them up for those anyone wanting to look for information. And it's just L'Appui, L'Appui, and it is one of the best sources of information to help guide caregivers. In fact, one recently just came out, a great article which I've just posted on social media. If your loved one is refusing to get care from someone outside, I'm used to my spouse, I'm used to my daughter or my son, and this is a really issue because they may not realize that their spouse or their daughter is going down. Just going downhill, beat up, and it's a challenge to be able to accept help from outside. So just a little example of what L'Appui does.
They are fabulous. They have support groups. They have local referrals. So I really encourage everyone in Quebec to get to know their services.
Absolutely. You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Delvecchio here, and we're talking with Liv Mendelsohn. She's the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. Liv, we have to head out to traffic, but when we come back, we talked about one of the things that you and I see on a daily basis where there is an emotional and a physical toll on caregivers, and we're seeing that even more, obviously, as our population ages. So we're going to address that topic, and we're talking with Liv Mendelsohn, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, and Liv is giving some wonderful information, making lives a little bit easier for the difficult role of caregiver. Liv, we talked just before traffic about something very common for caregivers, and that is about the emotional and physical drain of being a caregiver. So I'd love your input. Any words of advice for caregivers in that respect?
You know, we need to remember that caregiving is usually a marathon and not a sprint. And caregiving needs will probably increase over time during the caregiving journey. So we absolutely have to take care of ourselves. The person you're caring for will not do well if you're not taking care of yourself and doing well. And so there's lots of resources out there. We offer online mindfulness and ACT therapy, but there are lots of local support groups and resources. And, you know, I think caregivers we talk to every day tell us the best advice is to focus on what you can control and to reach out for the support in your network that is out there through friends and family and neighbors, and to let someone know when the needs are becoming too much and you're getting burnt out, whether it's your healthcare provider or someone in your family, to really open up that communication. Because, you know, when you bring your mom or dad to an appointment, as the caregiver, very rarely does the medical professional ask you how you're doing and track how you're doing over time. And we know that caregivers need that support and need to be as comfortable as possible asking for the help that they need.
You know, so important to ask for help. You're exactly right. You know, when you go to the doctor's appointment with your loved one, you know, you're in and out, right? They've got that room full of patients waiting, and they don't never, but very rarely ask about the caregiver. And I was on the phone actually with a client last week. I'm very fortunate to be on the board of Nova West Island, a local organizations live here, and they do different support groups. One of them is a day center for a loved one. If you need that respite, that break, particularly for those with dementia or Alzheimer's, and you could drop off mom, dad, husband, wife, and for those 5 or 6 hours, you've got a break. They're being well taken care of. And I was talking to someone that didn't even know about it. And just like you say, Liv, just ask around, ask for help, and eventually, hopefully you could find those resources. Now, Liv, I absolutely want to get to a big push from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. When we're talking policy, when we're talking government, you know, we all believe government can play a greater role, and they will have to play a greater role. Can you give us some examples of what would need to be done from our respective governments?
Sure. I mean, one of the things is what we've just been talking about. Our healthcare systems are centered around the patient, as well they should be, but we need to shift so that we also look at the health and well-being of the caregiver. And in every province and territory, that's an issue. We are calling for a national caregiving strategy, which is something that will help us move away from this sort of bric-a-brac jurisdiction by jurisdiction approach and really look at some larger possible solutions. Many other jurisdictions have great creative ideas. The UK and Australia, for instance, have income supports for caregivers, so you actually get a government support every month to help towards the cost of paying for care. That's one I think that would be really, really helpful. We know there's a huge shortage in care providers right now, so people, even if they have resource, are having trouble hiring someone to help them. We need intervention there to make sure that care providers have the pay and work environment that they need so that it's an attractive job for people and people stay in the field. There are lots of things we can do, and I think the key really is coming together across the country with a national strategy that will look at all of the different policy ideas and really put a focus on caregiving.
I love that. Talking with Liv Mendelsohn, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. And Liv, I'm sure you've got a lot of caregivers screaming into the radio, "Go, Liv, go!" You know, you gave an example of some of the challenges with caregivers, and one of them is financial in many respects, from, just not being able to afford caregivers, or like you mentioned, career advancement. And it's for men and a woman, but we see it a lot more for adult daughters that may be putting their career on hold to take care of their loved one. Well, that's a financial cost, and a long-term financial cost as well. So I love the fact that, okay, let's make our governments realize that there is some financial implications. And it's not all about money, right, Liv? I mean, but that's a big part of it. And being able to deal with the support of our caregivers. And I also like the fact that you mentioned the shortage of some care providers. And I'd like you to expand just a little bit on that. What suggestions can be done to get more care providers in Canada?
Yeah, we know that it's precarious and unstable work for people. So they're working lots of different shifts in different places often, and provinces are sort of just poaching workers from one to the next, rather than finding real solutions, having more people trained, looking at our immigration policies so that we can bring in more trained people from other countries as well, and making sure that, again, there are attractive wages. Right now, for instance, in Ontario, in long-term care homes, there are 2 to 3 worker staff shortage every shift. So you can imagine the impact that has on care. So we really need to make sure that we are valuing the people who do this work, and that, they're earning more than they would earn, at a fast food restaurant, for instance, and that it's work that has a career ladder, so that people don't leave the field right away, so that we get the people for whom it's their vocation and they love providing care, that there's an opportunity for them to stay in the field and continue to grow their skills and to rise in their career.
Absolutely. I think you bring it up. Make it a field that is, maybe a last resort field. Quite the opposite. Should be something that people strive for and can succeed with. Liv, we're out of time. I want to thank you very, very much. How could our listeners find out a little bit more about the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence?
Sure. You can check us out at on our website. And I should say also that we are gearing up for a very large conference in November in Ottawa, the first major caregiving summit in Canada. And we encourage everyone, it's both in Ottawa and it's online. We know not all caregivers are able to leave the person that they're caring for. You can find out more at www.canadiancaregiving.org.
Okay, canadiancaregiving.org. Liv, we want to thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
All right. That's Liv Mendelsohn, Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. And now, speaking of caregiving, I'm actually going to be a featured guest this week at an upcoming webinar hosted by the Cummings Centre. It's called A Caregiver's Toolbox, Taking Care of Our Seniors. It's going to be this Tuesday, May 9th, from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. It's free for Cummings members and only $5 for guests that want to join in. I'll be speaking along with Tricia Felger from the Cummings Centre. She's a wealth of knowledge in home care and gerontology, and this is going to be an online presentation where caregivers can learn how to navigate the aging process with your loved one. It's going to be a Q&A session, so you could zoom in, if you will, and put your questions forward, and Tricia and I will be doing our best to answer all your questions. So you could find out more about this presentation this Tuesday at 7 p.m. for the Cummings Centre. Look it up at the Cummings Centre website in the upcoming events section, or call them at 514-343-3510.